Hey everyone, today we are going to be comparing and ordering integers. The first thing I'm going to talk about, and I'm going to use the space up here a little bit, is talk about these two symbols. This symbol means less than, and this symbol means greater than. And remember that the opening should always be towards the greater value. Today we are going to spend a lot of time focusing on comparing numbers that have the same sign, especially when they're both negative, but we do compare negative and positive numbers to each other, or numbers that have different signs. So when I compare 2 and -3, I can say that 2 is greater than -3, positives are greater than negatives, or I can say that the negative is less than the positive. Both of these statements are correct, so you can just choose which one you like better. When you are comparing numbers that have the same sign, and I'm going to draw a number line down here to kind of illustrate this. So here's my 0, -1, -2, -3. The further to the left I go, the smaller the number actually is. So if I want to compare -2 and -3, I'm going to say that -2 is greater than -3 because -2 is closer to 0. Or I can say that -3 is less than -2 because it is further away from 0. It is more negative. So this is the area where we're going to spend most of our focus today, is comparing those numbers that have the same sign, especially when they're negative. So in our examples down here, I've got comparing two integers. So it says Justin has a score of -5 on the Trueville trivia game. Desiree's score is -3. Write an inequality to compare the scores and then explain the meaning of the inequality. So in this one, I can say that -5 is less than -3, or I can say that -3 is greater than -5, whichever one you choose to write is fine. And then to explain the meaning of this, I could say that Justin is losing the game. Or I can say that Desiree is winning. Because she has the greater score. So Justin is losing because his score represents a lesser value, or I can say that Desiree is winning even though her score is negative, she still has a greater score than Justin. Part B says Andrew and his father are hiking near Tacklebox Canyon. Their current elevation in relation to sea level is -38 feet. Tacklebox Canyon has an elevation of -83 feet. It says write an inequality to compare the elevations and explain the meaning. Well, -38 feet is greater than -83 feet, or I can say that -83 is less than -38. And I can say that their current elevation is closer to sea level than Tacklebox Canyon. So they are closer to sea level. They are at a greater elevation, even though they are still below sea level. In example number 2, it says to use a number line to order the sets of integers from least to greatest. I'm just going to draw one number line because these values are the same in both examples. So I'm only going to do one. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Two, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. When you create your number lines, they should count away from 0 on either side, with negatives being on the left and positives being to the right. That is going to be the number one mistake that we make in creating our number lines, is making sure the negatives and the positives are going in the correct direction, especially if we are comparing or ordering all negative integers. So making sure you start with 0 and then count away from 0, going to the left with negatives, and then starting at 0, counting away from 0 to the right with positives. So -8 is going to be here, then -6. Nope, not -6. -1, 0, 3, and then 6. In this second example, I have the numbers listed in reverse order, but our number line should still look the same. So we're still going to start with the most negative value, which is -8, and then go to -1, 0, 3, and then 6. So your number line should always go from most negative to most positive. In part C, it says the table shows the lowest accessible elevations for several continents. Order the continents from least to greatest according to their lowest elevation. So it says which continent has the least accessible elevation. That's going to be the one that's most negative, so South America. Which continent has the greatest accessible elevation? That's going to be the one that's closest to sea level, so that's going to be Australia. And if I want to order the continents from least to greatest, I'm going to start with South America. So that one's this. And then I'm going to go to North America at -86. Then Antarctica. And then Australia. So least to greatest is from furthest left to furthest right on the number line. It's going to be most negative to least negative, even if I don't cross over into the positive numbers. Part D says the table shows the freezing points in degrees Celsius for 6 substances. Nitric acid freezes at -42 degrees Celsius. Between the freezing points of which 2 substances is the freezing point of nitric acid? So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put the existing acids in my table or substances in my table in numerical order from least to greatest. So I'm going to start with acetone at -95. Then carbon dioxide at -78. Then aniline at -6, seawater at -2, water at 0, and acetic acid at 17. And then I'm going to say, okay, where does nitric acid belong? Well, nitric acid belongs right in here. So -42 is going to be in between those two things. So it's going to be in between carbon dioxide and aniline. In our last example here, it says comparisons with absolute value. So it says, suppose Emma and Colby are scuba diving. Emma dove 25 feet below sea level and Colby dove to 30 feet below sea level. Who reached a greater depth? Well, if, excuse me, if I'm comparing these two numbers, -30, which represents the 30 feet below sea level, is actually less than -25 feet below sea level, so it's further down. But it says who reached a greater depth. So I'm actually taking the absolute value of these things. So it's the absolute value of -30 and the absolute value of -25. And that means that 30 is greater than 25. So Colby reached a greater depth. Part B says explain why an account balance less than -$40 represents a debt greater than $40. So I'm going to pick a random value. So I'm going to say that I owe someone $50. So if I owe someone $50, that would be represented by -50. So -$50 is less than -$40. This negative 50 represents a debt greater than negative 40 because I owe someone more money. So $50 is a greater debt because I owe more money. To someone else. So in these two, while both numbers are negative and both numbers represent something that is less than the original value given, when you take the absolute value and you look at them in terms of positive numbers or who owes more or who dove further, you can look at them as positive numbers and compare them in that way. There is a 4.3 worksheet that has some of each of these types of questions on it for you to work on for tomorrow.